I still remember the way the words sliced through the air like a blade. At my own son's wedding, surrounded by glittering chandeliers and people raising champagne glasses, my new daughter-in-law turned to her parents and called me a pitiful old man who barely belonged there. The laughter that followed burned deeper than any insult I'd ever endured. But what truly silenced the room was when her father froze, staring at me as if he'd seen a ghost. His next words changed everything. "Stay with me, and don't forget to support this channel. My name is Richard Hayes, though most people just call me Rick. I turned 60 last winter, and if I'm being honest, I've lived my life in a way that most would call ordinary. A small suburban house, a reliable pickup truck, and the quiet routines that keep me grounded. My wife, Margaret, passed away 8 years ago, and since then, I've lived alone. People see me as the widower who gardens on Sundays, waves at the mailman, and keeps to himself. That image suited me just fine. I learned long ago that the easiest way to protect yourself is to look exactly like what people expect. For years, I kept my true story buried beneath layers of modesty. I didn't talk about the years I spent building and selling small companies, or the fortune that followed me like a shadow. To the outside world, I was just a retired mechanical engineer who lived on his pension. To me, that anonymity was freedom. It meant that no one looked at me as a wallet or a stepping stone. People saw only what I allowed them to see, an aging man, quiet, comfortable, and unremarkable. But weddings have a strange way of pulling families into the spotlight. My son, Matthew, had been dating Claire Reynolds for a little under a year. I had only met her twice before their engagement. Once over coffee, where she asked me probing questions about my retirement savings. And once at Thanksgiving, when she made a remark about how humble my home looked compared to the houses she was used to. Each time, I smiled and said little. That was always my way. The Reynolds family estate was another world entirely. Spread over rolling acres in Virginia, with a chapel big enough to seat 300 guests, it was a stage built for grandeur. The wedding itself was nothing short of a royal event. I watched my son, 34 years old, his face alight with joy, as Claire walked down the aisle in a gown that likely cost more than what I had once earned in a year of honest labor. For a fleeting moment, I told myself to hold on to his happiness, to ignore the extravagance that surrounded us. I chose my outfit carefully that morning, a well-fitted grey suit, polished shoes, and an old wristwatch that had once belonged to my father. Nothing showy, nothing that would raise questions. I wanted to blend into the sea of guests, to be present without being noticed. That was always the safest place to stand. But blending in isn't always possible. At the reception, I sat quietly at a corner table, sipping water, while others filled the dance floor. The orchestra played, champagne poured like water, and the air smelled of roses shipped in from overseas. That's when Claire approached, her parents trailing behind her. "Mom, Dad," she said in a voice sticky with false sweetness, "I want you to meet Matthew's father." Then, as if she couldn't resist, she added with a smirk, "He's a bit of a pitiful old man, doesn't have much, but he's harmless." Laughter bubbled around the table. It was sharp, cruel, and far too loud. I felt my face flush, but I didn't move. I had faced worse in life than the mockery of shallow people. Still, the sting of hearing those words at my own son's wedding was a wound I hadn't expected. And then came the silence. Robert Reynolds, Claire's father, had stopped laughing. His eyes locked on me, wide and unblinking. He leaned forward, his voice low but heavy with recognition. "Wait a minute," he said, his words slicing through the noise of the room. "Aren't you Richard Hayes, the man who bought out Reynolds Manufacturing years ago?" The laughter died instantly. Claire's face drained of color, confusion flickering in her eyes. Her mother, Paula, stiffened, clutching the diamond necklace at her throat as though it could explain away the moment. I sat there, calm on the outside, though my pulse thundered in my ears. I gave him the smallest of smiles and shook my head gently. "You must be mistaken," I said. But Robert knew better. I saw it in the way his mouth tightened, the way the memory lit behind his eyes. He had been in that boardroom after all. He had seen me then, though perhaps he hadn't realized who I was. Back then, I had sat quietly at the far end of the table, letting my attorneys speak for me, allowing the mask of invisibility to do its work. But masks can only hold so long. The truth was simple, though rarely spoken. I had been the anonymous investor who saved his company from ruin, the same company he nearly destroyed through reckless expansion and poor judgment. I hadn't bought Reynolds Manufacturing for revenge or prestige. I bought it because it was undervalued, because its bones were strong, even if its leadership was weak. Under proper management, it had thrived. And it had. For the past 6 years, Robert's livelihood had unknowingly rested on my decisions. The irony of it all wasn't lost on me. Claire had called me pitiful, an embarrassment to her new family. Yet every inch of their wealth, every glass of champagne being poured that night, had been made possible because of me. I excused myself soon after, claiming fatigue, though my mind was anything but tired. Back in my modest home, I sat in the dark with a glass of water, my thoughts replaying Robert's face, Claire's smirk, and Matthew's smile as he danced with his bride. I had worked so hard to shield my son from my financial reality. Margaret and I had agreed years ago never to burden him with the truth. We wanted him to build his own life, to know the value of work, not to coast on inherited wealth. That decision had cost me years of pretending, and now it seemed it might cost me even more. The following morning, Matthew showed up at my door, his expression tight with questions he didn't yet know how to ask. He paced my living room, running his hands through his hair, the same way he did when he was a boy, trying to hide his nerves. "Dad," he said, "Claire's father. He pulled me aside last night after you left. He asked me some very specific questions about your past, about Mom, about business deals. What's going on?" I took a long breath, steadying myself. I had always known this moment would come. I just didn't expect it to arrive so violently, on the very night meant to celebrate my son's new life. "What did he ask exactly?" I said, though I already knew. "He wanted to know if you had been involved in major acquisitions, if you had patents, investments. Dad, he seemed to think you were—" Matthew hesitated, his eyes searching mine. "He seemed to think you were someone important." The words twisted in the air between us, heavy with all the years of silence. I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could, my phone buzzed. A new message from Claire. "Rick, we need to have lunch today. There are things Matthew and I would like to discuss with you." I held the phone out for my son to read. His face shifted, first confused, then concerned. "What do you think she wants?" he asked. I already knew. Claire wasn't the type to leave questions unanswered, especially when money was involved. Robert had planted a seed, and Claire, ambitious as ever, was already planning to harvest it. I set the phone down slowly. "I think," I said, choosing my words with care, "that your wife is far more calculating than we realized." The restaurant Claire chose for lunch was one of the most expensive in the city, the kind of place where the menus didn't have prices printed on them because, as the saying goes, if you have to ask, you can't afford it. When Matthew and I arrived, she was already there, sitting in the corner with a perfect view of the skyline. Her blonde hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and she wore a tailored suit that looked fresh off a runway. Everything about her screamed control, from the way she crossed her legs to the way she raised her glass of wine as we sat down. "Rick." "Matthew," she said brightly, standing to greet us. Her smile was dazzling, but her eyes, green and sharp, were scanning me like a detective studying a suspect. "I'm so glad you could make it. I thought it would be nice to celebrate our new family ties properly." I forced a polite smile and sat down across from her. "Of course, Claire. Though I admit this feels a bit more formal than family lunch." She laughed lightly, though there was no warmth in it. "Well, I don't believe in doing anything halfway. Family, business, life, it all deserves full effort." The waiter appeared with a bottle of Bordeaux that must have cost close to $1,000. Claire ordered without looking at the list. It was a calculated move, and I knew it. She wanted to establish the stage: wealth, sophistication, control. "Claire," Matthew said cautiously, What's this really about? She ignored him, keeping her eyes on me. Rick, I had a long talk with my father last night. He mentioned some interesting things about business, about acquisitions, about anonymous investors. It got me thinking. Isn't it funny how life brings people together in unexpected ways? I swirled the wine in my glass, but didn't drink. Life does have a sense of humor, I replied. Claire leaned forward, lowering her voice as though she were about to share a secret. My father said that when Reynolds Manufacturing was acquired years ago, there was a woman or perhaps a man who sat quietly at the table, letting lawyers do the talking. An anonymous figure who carried a presence of authority, even without speaking. He always wondered who that person was. Matthew looked between us, sensing the tension but unable to place it. Claire, what does this have to do with lunch? Her eyes glittered as she reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. Because, she said smoothly, I did a little research. Look at this. She showed us a news clipping from nearly 7 years ago. A small article about the acquisition of Reynolds Manufacturing. In the grainy photo, taken in a boardroom full of suits, there was indeed a figure at the far end of the table. Half hidden, face turned slightly, but unmistakable to anyone who knew me. The silence at the table was suffocating. Matthew stared at the photo, then at me. I could see the realization dawning in his eyes, the puzzle pieces aligning after years of questions he never thought to ask. Dad, he whispered, is that you? I met his gaze, the same brown eyes he'd inherited from his mother, full of both confusion and hurt. I wanted to lie, to deflect, to protect him from the truth a little longer. But something in me was tired of hiding. Claire leaned back, a triumphant smile spreading across her lips. It's uncanny, isn't it? The posture, the suit, even the watch. The resemblance is too strong to be coincidence. Matthew's voice trembled. Dad, tell me it's not true. I set my glass down and folded my hands on the table. Son, I said quietly, there are things about your mother and me, about our life, that I never told you. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I wanted you to build your own life, without the weight of expectations or shortcuts. Claire's smile sharpened. So it is true. You were the one who bought my father's company. You've been sitting on a fortune this whole time, haven't you? Her voice carried the tone of accusation, but beneath it I heard greed. Matthew's chair scraped against the floor as he pushed back. He ran his hands through his hair, the same restless habit he'd had since he was a boy. Dad, why? Why would you keep something like this from me? Because you deserved the chance to earn your own success, I said firmly. When your mother and I came into money, we promised each other we wouldn't let it define us. We wanted you to grow without it hanging over your head. And you did, Matthew. You've worked hard, built a career, bought your home, all without a dime of help from me. But all this time, he started, his voice cracking. I reached for his hand, but he pulled away. I know you're angry, I said softly. I knew this day would come. I just hoped it wouldn't be like this. And Claire seized the moment, her voice syrupy, sweet. Matthew, don't you see? This changes everything. We're not just an ordinary couple anymore. We're part of something much bigger. Your father has resources, influence, things that could help us build a legacy. I turned my gaze on her, steady and unblinking. Is that what you see when you look at my son, Claire? A shortcut to wealth? A ticket to power? Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she recovered quickly. Don't twist this, Rick. I love Matthew, but love doesn't mean ignoring opportunities. Family wealth should be managed, structured. It's about securing the future for generations. Matthew looked like a man standing on a cliff, torn between two worlds. His loyalty to me warred with his love for his wife, and I could see the storm brewing behind his eyes. I sighed, pushing back my chair. If that's how you see it, then I think this conversation is over. Matthew, I'll tell you everything, but not here, not like this. I left money on the table for the bill, though Claire had already insisted on paying with her father's card. As I stood, I leaned toward her, lowering my voice. You're smart, Claire, smarter than I gave you credit for. But be careful, curiosity has a way of uncovering more than you're ready to handle. Her eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. That night, back at home, I opened the old wooden chest I kept tucked away in my study. Inside were years of records, contracts, patents, investment portfolios, stock certificates, a paper trail of the life I had built in silence. Margaret had been the only one who truly knew. She had stood beside me when I sold my first company for $25 million. She had been there when we reinvested, when we built carefully, piece by piece, until the numbers grew beyond what we ever imagined. By the time she passed away, our net worth had soared to hundreds of millions. I had continued the work alone, diversifying, acquiring, investing in companies people overlooked. Reynolds Manufacturing had been one of the smartest moves I'd ever made. Irony dripped from every page. The company that once belonged to Robert Reynolds now thrived because of me, the pitiful old man his daughter had mocked. As I sifted through the papers, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Claire. "Rick, we need to talk again. Tomorrow. Matthew and I have some ideas about how our family should handle this new reality." I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples. She wasn't wasting any time. In her mind, she had already positioned herself as co-pilot of a fortune she didn't earn. But she didn't know me, not really. I had spent decades mastering patience, strategy, discretion. I had built empires in the shadows, where no one thought to look. And if Claire Reynolds wanted to drag me into the light, she was about to learn that I was far more dangerous in the open than I had ever been in hiding. The next evening, Matthew and Claire came to my house. I could tell from the moment they walked in that the roles had already shifted. Claire strode in like she owned the place, a leather folder tucked under her arm, while Matthew followed behind, his shoulders slumped, his eyes shadowed with uncertainty. My son looked like a man torn in half, caught between love and loyalty, and I hated the way Claire seemed to feed on that weakness. I had set out a simple spread on the coffee table: cheese, crackers, a modest bottle of red wine. Nothing extravagant, nothing that might give Claire the satisfaction of thinking I wanted to impress her. I wanted her to sit in my living room and see exactly what she thought she was dealing with: a 60-year-old widower in a modest home, surrounded by photos of a family built on love, not on wealth. "Dad," Matthew began, his voice cautious, "thanks for having us over. Well, there are things we need to discuss." Claire settled into the armchair across from me, crossing her legs with practiced grace. She opened her folder with a little flourish, as though she were unveiling a contract at a corporate merger. "Rick, I think we got off on the wrong foot at lunch," she said smoothly. "What I want is simple. For us to work together. You've been keeping your financial life private for years, and I understand that. But now that we're family, it makes sense to create some structure, something that ensures stability and transparency for all of us." I leaned back, swirling the wine in my glass. "Structure?" I asked mildly. She nodded eagerly. "Yes, a family foundation. We could start with something substantial, say $50 million. That would give us credibility, allow us to make philanthropic contributions, and open doors in the community. It would also protect your privacy while ensuring that decisions aren't made in isolation." Matthew shifted uncomfortably beside her. "Claire's been thinking about ways we could all work together," he said. His tone was tentative, as though he wasn't fully convinced himself. $50 million, I repeated slowly, tasting the words as though they were something bitter. That's quite an opening request from someone who called me a pitiful old man less than a week ago. Claire didn't flinch. "I was wrong about you," she said quickly, her smile widening. "Now that I know who you really are, I see the bigger picture. And I want to help. Family wealth works best when it's managed collaboratively across generations. You, me, Matthew, any future children we have, we could form a board of trustees, equal votes, equal voices, very democratic." I studied her for a long moment, letting the silence stretch. "Equal voices?" I asked finally. "You mean I provide the fortune, but decisions about it are shared equally with you?" "Yes," she said firmly, her confidence radiating. "That's how lasting family legacies are built. And..." I set my glass down and leaned forward. "Tell me, Claire, "Do you love my son?" The question hit her like a slap. For the first time, her polished facade faltered. She glanced at Matthew, then back at me. "What kind of question is that?" "A simple one," I said quietly. "Do you love Matthew for who he is, or do you love what you think being married to him represents?" Matthew looked at her, his face pale, waiting for her answer. She shifted uncomfortably, her hands tightening on the folder in her lap. "That's not fair," she said finally. "Of course I love Matthew, but love doesn't mean ignoring practical realities. Marriage is also about building a future, about protecting assets, about creating opportunities." I stood, walked to my bookshelf, and pulled out a folder I had prepared that morning. "Interesting you should mention protecting assets," I said, returning to my seat. I opened the folder and laid out several documents on the coffee table. "Because I did some digging of my own. It seems you've been busy." Her eyes widened as she recognized the papers. "What is this?" she asked, her voice tight. "This," I said calmly, "is a record of your communications with Aguilar Private Investigations. You hired them 2 weeks ago to look into corporate ownership structures, to trace anonymous investors. Quite an expensive service." Matthew turned to her in shock. "Claire, you hired private investigators?" She fumbled for words. "It's not what it looks like. I just wanted to understand our family's financial situation better." I shook my head. "No, Claire, you were building a case. These documents show you also consulted with a law firm that specializes in family estate disputes. And if that weren't enough, you opened 3 new lines of credit in the past month, borrowing against the assumption that your financial situation was about to improve." Matthew's face drained of color as he looked at his wife. "Claire, is this true?" Her composure cracked, but only for a moment. "I did it for us," she said quickly. "I wanted to make sure we were protected. My family has been through enough instability. I wasn't going to let that happen again." "Your family's instability," I said evenly, "is more severe than you've admitted. I had my advisor pull the records. Your parents' estate is mortgaged to 80% of its value. Their investment accounts are nearly empty, drained to maintain their lifestyle since your father lost the company. And most of their current income comes from consulting positions, arranged through the new management I put in place." Claire's face went pale. Matthew turned to me, his voice raw. "Dad, how do you know all this?" "Because, son, when someone investigates me, I investigate them back." The silence that followed was suffocating. Claire's mask had finally cracked, and Matthew sat frozen, staring at the woman he had just married. "You see, Matthew," I continued gently, "your wife didn't just marry you for love. She married you as part of a strategy, an investment. And the moment she discovered the depth of my resources, she began plotting ways to access them." Claire finally found her voice, but it was trembling. "That doesn't change the fact that we're family now. We should be working together, not against each other." I leaned back, studying her. "You're right. Family should work together. But tell me, Claire, what work did you have in mind? Because from where I sit, all I see are plans to take control of something you didn't build and don't understand." Her green eyes flashed, desperate now. "You can't shut me out. This is Matthew's life too. He deserves a seat at the table." Matthew's voice was low, almost broken. "Claire, did you marry me because you love me, or because of my father's money?" The question hung in the air, heavy, unbearable. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The silence stretched, and in that silence, Matthew had his answer. I stood and gathered the papers, sliding them back into the folder. "Claire, you're ambitious, I'll give you that. But you underestimated me. You thought I was a pitiful old man you could outmaneuver. What you didn't realize is that I've been winning games like this for decades, games most people don't even know they're playing." Her face hardened. "You'll regret underestimating me," she said coldly. I gave her a thin smile. "We'll see." That night, after they left, Matthew called me from his car. His voice was strained, filled with confusion and pain. "Dad, I don't know what to do. She's my wife, but I don't even recognize her anymore." "Son," I said softly, "sometimes love blinds us to the truth. But truth has a way of cutting through eventually. You need to decide whether you want a partner who loves you or a partner who sees you as a path to something else. The line was silent for a long moment before he whispered, "I don't know if I can forgive her." I swallowed hard, wishing Margaret was still here to guide us both. "Take your time, Matthew, but know this, whatever happens, I'll stand by you." As I hung up, I knew the battle with Claire Reynolds had only just begun. She was ambitious, relentless, and dangerous, and she had just declared war on me. 3 days passed before the next storm arrived. I spent those days in restless silence, going about my routine, watering the garden, repairing a squeaky gate, reading the newspaper, but every moment felt like the calm before a hurricane. I knew Claire wouldn't back down. Her pride wouldn't allow it, and her desperation wouldn't let her walk away. The call came from James Sullivan, my financial advisor, and one of the few people in the world who knew the truth about me. His voice was tense. "Rick, we have a problem. Someone's been making inquiries with the SEC about your investment structures." My stomach tightened. "What kind of inquiries?" "Serious ones," James said. "Professional level. They're asking whether you properly declared beneficial ownership in certain companies, whether your shell corporations reported their activities. There are even whispers about insider trading." "Rick, this isn't casual curiosity. Someone is trying to build a case against you." I didn't have to ask who. I could practically see Claire's green eyes glittering as she plotted her next move. "How dangerous is this?" I asked. James hesitated. "Your structures are legal. They're complex, but solid. Still, if someone pushes hard enough, regulators could open an investigation. Even if you're cleared, it would mean months, maybe years of scrutiny, public scrutiny. That's the very thing you've spent 2 decades avoiding." I rubbed my forehead, feeling the weight of years pressing down on me. I had built my life around invisibility, around keeping my fortune quiet so Matthew could live freely. Now that shield was cracking, all because of a woman who thought marriage was just another business transaction. "What do you recommend?" I asked quietly. "Shut it down," James said bluntly. "Resolve the family conflict before it escalates further. Once regulators are involved, it's out of your control. You need to act decisively." When I hung up, my phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Matthew. His voice was flat, hollow. "Dad, we need to talk. Something happened." An hour later, he arrived at my house, looking 10 years older than his 34 years. His suit was rumpled, his eyes bloodshot. He sat heavily on the couch and stared at the floor. "Claire filed for legal separation," he said. The words hit me like a fist. "What?" "She says she's worried about financial liabilities, about undisclosed family assets. Her lawyer says she needs to protect herself legally." He let out a bitter laugh. "She's building her escape plan before she even unpacks her wedding gifts." I sat across from him, my heart aching. "I'm sorry, son." "Are you?" he asked sharply, his eyes flashing. "Because it feels like you orchestrated this, like you wanted my marriage to fail just to prove a point about her intentions." The accusation cut deep, but I didn't flinch. "Matthew, I never wanted your marriage to fail. I wanted you to see the truth before it was too late." "Oh, by digging into her life, by humiliating her, by exposing her family's finances?" He shook his head. "I don't even know who you are anymore, Dad." I swallowed hard. "I'm the same man who raised you to value honesty and integrity, the same one who wanted you to succeed on your own without leaning on my fortune." He looked at me, his face twisted with pain. "And look where that's gotten me. My wife is leaving me, her family is in ruins, and my mother was the only one who knew the truth. Now I find out you're some kind of hidden tycoon. It feels like my whole life has been built on lies." I wanted to reach across the space between us, to hold him the way I had when he was a child, after nightmares woke him. But I knew those days were gone. The distance between us was real, and it hurt more than any insult Claire could throw. "Matthew," I said softly, "there's something else you need to know. Claire has filed complaints with federal authorities about my investments. She's not just leaving you, she's trying to destroy me." He looked up sharply. What does that mean? It means this isn't over. It's only beginning. And you need to decide whether you're going to stand with me or with her. The silence stretched. Finally, he whispered, "What do you want me to do?" The meeting was set for the following Monday in James Sullivan's boardroom. The players were assembled like a cast in a courtroom drama. Me and James on one side of the long, polished table, Claire and her lawyer, Mark Vance, on the other. Robert and Paula Reynolds sat beside them, their designer clothes doing little to hide the tension etched into their faces. And in the middle, caught between worlds, was Matthew. Mark Vance opened with the confidence of a man who believed he was about to win. "Mrs. Reynolds," he gestured to Claire, "has discovered that Mr. Hayes has concealed considerable assets while allowing her family to suffer financial hardship. This suggests a deliberate pattern of deception that warrants investigation." James responded calmly. "Mr. Hayes's financial activities are entirely legal. Your client's recent complaints to authorities seem motivated by personal animosity rather than legitimate concern." Claire leaned forward, her eyes locked on me. "This isn't about animosity, it's about family responsibility. Rick has manipulated people's lives while pretending to be someone he's not." I folded my hands on the table. "Claire, I have never manipulated anyone. I invested in struggling companies and made them thrive. I lived quietly because I prefer privacy. Neither of those things is illegal or immoral. You bought my father's company and let him believe he had failed," she shot back. "Your father did fail," I said evenly. "He over-leveraged the business, and it would have collapsed within months. I saved it. I saved his employees. Without me, Reynolds Manufacturing wouldn't exist today." Robert shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. "Mr. Hayes, I admit you saved the company, but you were strategic in hiding your involvement." "Strategic, yes," I agreed. "Deceptive, no. You never asked about my investments, and I was under no obligation to volunteer information." Mark Vance slid a thick folder across the table. "We have evidence that Mr. Hayes used his financial position to manipulate situations involving my client's family, the consulting fees to Mr. Reynolds, the timing of business decisions, even the investigation into Claire's personal affairs." James raised an eyebrow. "Evidence of what exactly?" "Of a man protecting his interests against a woman who hired private investigators to dig into his life." Claire's voice sharpened. "What about respect, Rick? Respect for your son's wife? Respect for me?" I looked at her, my voice low and steady. "Respect? You introduced me as a pitiful old man at your wedding. You hired investigators, filed complaints, and tried to force me into handing over control of my assets. And now you want to lecture me on respect?" The room went silent. Matthew shifted uncomfortably, his face pale. Finally he asked, "What do you want, Claire? What will it take to end this?" She exchanged a glance with her lawyer. "A formal family financial agreement. A trust. Mr. Hayes contributes a significant portion, say $15 million, into a fund managed by a family council. That ensures transparency, stability, and fairness." I almost laughed. "You want me to hand over my money to a committee run by the same people who've been trying to ruin me?" "We want a fair arrangement," Claire insisted. I stood, walking slowly to the window. The city stretched below us, full of people going about ordinary lives, unaware of the war raging 20 floors above. When I turned back, my decision was made. "I have a counteroffer," I said. "You withdraw every complaint, end every investigation, and in return, I'll give you $5 million. Cash, one payment. In exchange, you and your parents agree never to contact me or Matthew again." The shock in the room was palpable. Matthew's head snapped toward me. "Dad, you can't be serious." But I was. Deadly serious. "5 million, Claire repeated slowly, as though testing the weight of the words. "That's right," I said. $5 million to walk away." Mark Vance's eyes lit with calculation. He was already running the numbers. 5 million was more than they could ever hope to win in court, and without the risk of years of litigation. "This is absurd," Matthew said, his voice shaking. "We're sitting here negotiating the price of my marriage like it's a business deal." I looked at him softly. "Isn't that exactly what it's been?" The silence was brutal. Claire opened her mouth, then shut it, For once, she had no clever words. 5 million, I repeated. Or nothing. If you refuse, the house is gone, the consulting income is gone, and you'll spend years in court. The choice is yours. The boardroom emptied slowly after my offer, leaving only the faint hum of the air conditioning and the echo of Matthew's voice in my ears. He had looked at me with disbelief, his face pale as chalk. I knew my son was wrestling with the same question that had haunted me for years. How far was too far when it came to protecting family? That night, I sat alone in my study, papers spread across the desk. Old contracts, investment statements, acquisition records, 15 years of my life laid out like a war map. Margaret's photo sat beside the lamp, her gentle smile watching me, as if she knew I needed her strength more than ever. "What would you say to me now?" I whispered. "Would you tell me to fight or to let go?" The next morning, James called. "Rick, they're considering your offer. Vance knows 5 million up front is more than they could get in court, but Claire, she's not the type to back down gracefully." "She never has been," I muttered. At 11:47 the next day, the decision came. James's secretary buzzed me through. "Mark Vance is on the line." I picked up. "Mr. Hayes," Vance said smoothly, "my client accepts your terms. 5 million, plus assurance that her parents will keep their house and Robert will retain his consulting contract." I exhaled slowly. "Fine, but the conditions are clear. Once the money is transferred, none of you will contact me or my son again. Ever." The deal was signed by 5 o'clock. Claire Reynolds, now legally separated from my son, took the money and vanished like smoke. No calls, no letters, no explanations, just gone. Matthew came over that evening. He looked exhausted, his eyes rimmed with red. "Dad, did you really just buy my freedom from my wife?" I shook my head. "No, son. I gave you the truth and the means to move on. The rest was her choice." He sat heavily, running his hands through his hair. "And if she hadn't taken the money, then you'd still know who she was," I said quietly. "And I'd have made sure she regretted ever trying to manipulate our family." Matthew stared at me, his expression a mixture of awe and fear. "When did you become so ruthless?" I took a long sip of coffee before answering. "I think I always was, son. I just never had a reason to show it." The weeks that followed were strangely quiet. For the first time in months, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next attack. Claire had taken her payout and disappeared, and the Reynolds family had retreated into silence. But the damage lingered. Matthew filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. Watching him sign those papers was like watching a soldier return from war, scarred, older, but somehow freer. 6 months later, he called me one Sunday afternoon. His voice carried a spark I hadn't heard in years. "Dad, I met someone. Her name was Sarah. She was a teacher, kind and unassuming, with no taste for luxury or schemes. When Matthew described her, his voice was full of warmth instead of tension. She doesn't know anything about your money," he added quickly, as if to reassure me. "She just thinks you're a retired widower with a nice house and a stubborn garden." I laughed, feeling something loosen in my chest. "She sounds perfect. When do I get to meet her?" "Next Sunday. But Dad," his voice grew serious, "when we have dinner, can you just be you? Not the investor, not the tycoon, just my father." I smiled. "Of course, son. But if she turns out to be running background checks on me, the deal's off." Matthew laughed for the first time in months. "Deal?" With Claire gone, I turned my focus inward. For years, I had lived like a ghost, hiding behind modesty and silence. But Margaret's absence had taught me something. Money meant little without purpose. I sold the apartment where I had spent too many years alone and moved west to Santa Fe. The desert skies stretched wide and open, painting sunsets in shades of gold and crimson. There, no one knew me as the mysterious investor or the difficult father-in-law. I was just Rick, the man who showed up at the farmer's market every Saturday and never missed Sunday service. But I didn't stop at anonymity. With James's help, I quietly founded a small cultural fund in Margaret's honor. We called it the Hayes Foundation, and it provided scholarships to young engineers who dreamed of patenting their ideas but lacked the resources. Watching their faces light up as they presented prototypes at international fairs gave me a satisfaction no dividend ever could. One boy from Pittsburgh wrote me a letter. "Mr. Hayes, if it wasn't for your help, I'd still be loading boxes in a warehouse. Now I'm finishing my engineering degree. Thank you for believing in me." That letter brought tears to my eyes. It reminded me that wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in the lives we touch. My relationship with Matthew healed slowly. At first, dinners were stiff, full of unspoken words. But when Sarah entered his life, she bridged the gap with kindness I hadn't known we needed. She hugged me like family the first time we met, and laughed when I burned the roast at Christmas. "Now I see where Matthew gets his stubborn streak," she teased. For the first time in years, my home was filled with genuine laughter. No hidden motives, no veiled insults, just cookies, cocoa, and badly sung carols. That night, sitting by the fire, I whispered to Margaret's photo, "We made it, love. He's happy again." But Claire's shadow never fully disappeared. With $5 million in her pocket, she had enough to reinvent herself anywhere she pleased. Sometimes I imagined her in another city, charming, another unsuspecting family. It wasn't my problem anymore, and yet the thought lingered. I reminded myself of a truth I had learned too late. You cannot save everyone. You can only protect the people you love, and sometimes that means letting go of those who wish you harm. My days became simpler. Pottery classes, brunch with neighbors, long walks through the desert trails. I didn't need bodyguards or luxury cars. I needed peace. And peace, I discovered, cannot be bought. It must be chosen. One evening, Matthew asked me something that stayed with me. We were sitting on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the mountains, Sarah inside, preparing dinner. "Dad," he said slowly, "do you ever regret hiding who you were all those years, pretending to be ordinary?" I thought about it, the weight of decades pressing against my chest. "No," I said finally, "because invisibility gave me freedom. It gave you the chance to grow without shortcuts. But I also learned that being invisible too long makes you forget your own worth." Matthew nodded, his eyes reflecting the dying light. "I guess we both learned something the hard way." "Yes," I said softly, "that the people who truly matter don't care about what you own. They care about who you are when no one's watching." That night, as I closed the blinds and turned off the lights, I realized the war was finally over. Claire Reynolds had come into my life like a storm, threatening to uproot everything I had built. But in the end, she had only revealed the strength I'd forgotten. I had the strength to protect, to fight, and finally, to let go. I wasn't just a pitiful old man anymore. I was a father, a widower, a quiet warrior who had chosen peace over pride. And for the first time in years, I slept soundly, knowing that whatever battles lay ahead, I would face them with clarity, with purpose, and with love. The months after Claire disappeared were like stepping into a new season of my life. At 60 years old, I had lived through grief, hidden wealth, betrayal, and confrontation. Now I was learning what it meant to rebuild, to breathe again, without waiting for the next blow. But peace, I discovered, was not the absence of conflict. It was the choice to stop letting conflict define me. Matthew began to heal too. The divorce was finalized quickly, thanks to the settlement. He returned to his apartment, threw himself into work, and slowly reclaimed the laughter that Claire had drained from him. I watched him cautiously at first, waiting for the wounds to resurface. But when Sarah entered his life, the change was undeniable. Sarah was nothing like Claire. Where Claire saw life as a series of transactions, Sarah saw it as a series of connections. She didn't care about boardrooms or balance sheets. She cared about people, about stories, about making a difference in her classroom of restless teenagers. Matthew glowed when he spoke of her, and when I finally met her, I understood why. She looked at me not as the mysterious man behind a fortune, not as the pitiful old man Claire once mocked, but simply as Matthew's father. One Sunday afternoon, Sarah invited me to her modest house for dinner. The walls were lined with bookshelves overflowing with novels and poetry. Mismatched mugs hung in the kitchen, and the smell of homemade stew filled the air. It was warm, imperfect, and real. "Mr. Hayes," she said, setting a steaming bowl in front of me. "Matthew tells me you're a gardener. You'll have to give me tips. I can't even keep a cactus alive." I chuckled. "Call me Rick. And trust me, gardening is mostly about patience and knowing when to pull weeds before they choke out the good plants." She smiled knowingly, and I wondered if she sensed the metaphor running beneath my words. Dinner was filled with laughter. Sarah teased Matthew about his inability to cook pasta without burning it, and Matthew shot back with jokes about her collection of coffee mugs. I sat there quietly, letting the sound of their banter wash over me. For the first time in years, I felt something I had thought was gone forever: home. Yet even as life softened, reminders of the past crept in. One evening, James called me with news. "Rick, I've been keeping an eye on Claire," he said. I sighed. "Of course you have. Dead. She resurfaced in New York, changed her last name, started running in high social circles again. Word is, she's dating a wealthy businessman. Same pattern, different stage." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. "Let her. She's someone else's problem now." "Just thought you should know," James said. "She still has that 5 million. I smiled faintly. "Money doesn't change character. It only amplifies it. She'll find a way to waste it. People like her always do." And back in Santa Fe, life found a rhythm. I spent mornings in the garden, afternoons at pottery class, evenings reading by the fire. The Hayes Foundation grew quietly, funding scholarships and community projects. I attended ceremonies where young engineers presented their prototypes: solar panels built from recycled glass, water filters designed for rural towns, medical devices made from affordable parts. Their gratitude reminded me of Margaret, who had always believed in lifting others. One young woman approached me after receiving her scholarship. Her eyes sparkled with determination. "Mr. Hayes, thank you. No one in my family ever went to college. Because of you, I get to chase my dream." I felt my throat tighten. "Don't thank me. Thank your own courage. You're the one chasing it." Driving home that night, I realized something profound. My greatest investment wasn't in companies or stocks. It was in people. The kind of investment that multiplied not in dollars, but in hope. Still, the scars of the past whispered to me at night. Sometimes, lying in bed, I'd hear Claire's laughter echoing in my memory. Other times, I'd see Margaret's face, reminding me of the promise we had made to live quietly. I wondered if I had broken that promise by stepping into the light. But then I would remember Matthew's smile when he spoke of Sarah, the letters from scholarship students, the peace of my new life. And I would tell myself that Margaret would understand, that invisibility had been our shield, but authenticity was my healing. Christmas that year was different. Matthew and Sarah came to Santa Fe, bringing along a small tree decorated with handmade ornaments. We set it up in my living room, and Sarah insisted on baking cookies, though half of them came out burnt. Matthew laughed so hard he nearly cried, and I laughed with him. After dinner, we sat by the fire. Sarah leaned against Matthew, her head on his shoulder. I looked at them and felt something swell in my chest. "You two remind me of your mother and me," I said quietly. Matthew's eyes softened. "Yeah?" "Yes," I whispered. "Not because of the way you look, but because of the way you make each other better. That's rare. Don't lose it." Sarah smiled, squeezing Matthew's hand. "We won't." That night, after they went to bed, I stayed by the fire, staring at the flickering flames. For the first time since Margaret's death, I didn't feel alone. The room was warm, filled with echoes of laughter, and I realized something simple yet profound. Wealth had never been about money. It had always been about moments like this, about family, love, and the courage to protect them. Weeks later, Matthew asked me to meet him for coffee. He looked nervous, but also determined. "Dad," he began, "Sarah and I are talking about marriage." I smiled. "That's wonderful. But—" He hesitated. We don't want what happened before to happen again. We don't want secrets or money or expectations to get in the way. Sarah doesn't know about your wealth, and I want it to stay that way, at least for now. I nodded slowly. I understand. She should love you for you, not for what your father has in the bank. Exactly, Matthew said with relief. I wanted you to know. I placed my hand on his shoulder. Son, you're wiser than I was at your age, and if Sarah is who I believe she is, the truth won't matter when the time comes. She'll love you regardless. That night, I sat in the quiet of my study and thought about the arc of my life. From the young engineer building machines in a dusty garage, to the cautious investor hiding behind modest clothes, to the father confronting a manipulative daughter-in-law. It had been a long journey, full of shadows and secrets. But now, standing at 60, I realized something vital. The greatest legacy I could leave wasn't money. It was the lesson that love and integrity outlast any fortune. I closed Margaret's photo album, whispered goodnight, and turned out the light. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges, but for the first time in years, I welcomed it. Looking back now, with 60 years behind me, I see that the greatest battles of my life were never fought in boardrooms or courtrooms. They were fought in silence, inside my heart, inside my family. Money can build walls as easily as it builds bridges, and I learned the hard way that the richest life isn't the one with the largest bank account, but the one with the clearest conscience. For years, I thought invisibility was my protection. I hid who I was so my son could grow without shortcuts, so he would learn the value of honest work. And while that choice created distance between us, it also gave him the strength to stand on his own. What I didn't realize until recently is that invisibility can become a prison if you stay in it too long. It takes courage not only to protect what you love, but to live openly, without shame or fear. Claire taught me that some people will always see relationships as transactions, as strategies for gain. But Sarah and Matthew reminded me that true love is simple, patient, and kind. It doesn't calculate, it doesn't manipulate, it just is. And that is worth more than any fortune I'll ever have. So if you're listening to my story, I hope you take this with you. Your value is not defined by what others see or by what you own. It's defined by how you live when no one is watching, by the people you choose to stand beside, and by the courage you carry when storms come. I may have lost years to secrecy, but I gained wisdom in the process. And I've learned that the most elegant form of revenge is not destroying those who hurt you, it's thriving in their absence, building a life so full of meaning that their memory fades into irrelevance. If this story has touched you, stay with us. Subscribe, support, and share it so more people can remember this truth. Wealth fades, but love and integrity endure forever.